Daniel 7, and I'm calling this lesson the Jungle Book. You can see it up there on the screen, the Jungle Book. And I even went to a website and got the specific Jungle Book font, just like when I got the Lord of the Rings font. So that's the Jungle Book legit font right there, and it's Daniel 7. So that's where we are today. The ancient Jews regarded Daniel chapter 7 as the most important piece of the Bible. Back when the Bible was just the Old Testament, they thought Daniel chapter 7 was the most important chapter or portion of the Bible out of everything. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they all thought that, but even if at least some of them thought that, that just shows you this is an important chapter, that this is a chapter held in very high regard. They thought it was very significant. And so we're in Daniel chapter 7 this week. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet, and I'll go ahead and let you guys put this in your notes. Daniel is one of the few books of the Bible that's written in two different languages. There's two languages in the book of Daniel. Hebrew, which Hebrew is the language that a lot of the Bible is written in anyway. The Old Testament is almost all Hebrew. There's also a section of Daniel that's written in a language called Aramaic. Aramaic is kind of like that was the general language of the world back in the ancient days. You would know your hometown's language or like your home nation's language, but you would also learn Aramaic so that you could communicate with people from other nations. And so you had a lot of people back then were bilingual or trilingual. They knew multiple languages. And that was very common. Jesus knew 2 or 3 different languages. Paul knew a couple, at least, languages. And so lots of people in the Bible knew multiple languages, and it was just kind of a part of life. So anyway, Daniel, he wrote in Hebrew and he wrote in Aramaic. And the way that it's not an easy way to describe the split. It's not like, it's about half and half. But chapter 1 is written in Hebrew. Then chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic. And then chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, they go back to being in Hebrew. There's a reason for that, but it is a little bit harder to remember because it's not like, 6 chapters of this and 6 chapters of that. It's kind of mixed in a little bit. So it goes chapter 1, Hebrew, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Aramaic, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, back to Hebrew. So we did chapters 1 and 2 already. Starting with chapter 2, as it says up there, that's when it started being in the Aramaic language, and that continues all the way up to the chapter we're in today, Daniel 7. The reason that it switches to the Aramaic language, as I mentioned, Aramaic was the language of kind of the world. It was the language that all the Gentiles would speak so they could communicate with each other, if you were traveling to another nation. The portions of Daniel that are written in that language, they all describe what is called the times of the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles. And so what are the times of the Gentiles? Just a simple definition, the times of the Gentiles is any time that Jerusalem is under Gentile control. Now you guys know a Gentile is just a very general word that means somebody who's not a Jew. That's just basically what it means. In the Bible, you could just look, you'd say, here's what Jews do, and here's what non-Jews do. And all the non-Jews are just called Gentiles. We are Gentiles because we're not Jews. And so it's not as significant to divide people into those categories today. In the Bible, it helps to do that because it's written from the perspective of Jews. And of course, they live differently than the rest of the world. So they would often divide things up into Jews and Gentiles. So the times of the Gentiles, any time that Jerusalem is under Gentile control. So Jerusalem was under Jewish control, and that's how it always was because it was the capital of Israel. And it was just always under the Jews' control. And then when Babylon rolled in and Babylon, kidnapped some of the people and started taking people away and killed the king, or they didn't kill the king, they kidnapped the king, they killed his sons. When all that started happening, Babylon was in control of Jerusalem. And then after Babylon, then the medo-persian empire, they were in charge of Jerusalem. And then after them, it was Greece. And after them, it was Rome. And so do you guys remember talking about how in the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, there were all these different nations that kind of, they became world empires. You can read about them in any history book. and they ruled the world for a portion of time, and that was the order it went in. Well, all of those are the times of the Gentiles, and that time continues all the way up till today. And it will continue all the way up until the tribulation starts. Because, okay, you could say right now, there is the nation of Israel. They have the city of Jerusalem. So you could say, well, I guess the time of the Gentiles is over because Jerusalem, the Jews have it back. They actually don't have control all over Jerusalem yet. They have to share it with a lot of the Muslims and other people who live there. For example, the Jews want to rebuild the temple because that's just something they really want to do right now. They want to rebuild the temple because it was destroyed a few thousand years ago. They can't rebuild the temple because the place where the temple was always stood before, it's owned by Muslims. And so they can't rebuild the temple right now. They really want to. In the tribulation, they're going to get to. So I think the Antichrist will make some kind of deal and allow them to do that. But anyway, right now, even though they have pretty much most of Jerusalem, it's not all the way back in their control. And so for the time being, the times of the Gentiles, they're still in effect. Okay, so you guys at Daniel 7, you got your Bibles there? All right. Let's read the first verse. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. So Belshazzar, who's the king that we've been going through and hearing about a lot throughout the book? Who? Nebuchadnezzar, yeah. Belshazzar is possibly like Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. So this is after Nebuchadnezzar has died, and now there's been one or two other kings in between, and now we're on to Belshazzar. He's the new king. He might not have been Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. He might just have been like another guy who became the king later on. We're not really sure from history. But anyway, so he's the king at this point. Chapter 5 of Daniel, which we're going to go back to later, it'll talk a lot more about this guy. Right now, the only reason it includes that is to tell us like where we are. You could actually go back in history and look at what was the first year of Belshazzar, and you can know the exact year that this dream that Daniel's going to have was taking place, which I didn't write it down, but it's like 531 BC or something like 631, something like that. Okay, verses 2 and 3. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. So when it says the four winds of heaven were stirring things up, that just means God is stirring things up. It just means that God's reaching down and doing stuff. And it says the four beasts came up from the sea. Okay, first of all, the sea, when the Bible talks about the sea in those terms, it means just all people, like the sea of humanity. So when it says four beasts came up out of the sea, it means these are four beasts coming up out of humanity. What are the beasts? Beasts show up a lot in apocalyptic literature, and beasts always represent a kingdom or a nation, or sometimes they'll represent the leader of that kingdom or that nation. But generally, they represent. Most of the time, I think of them as representing the nation itself. But once in a while, it'll kind of switch and mention like the leader of that nation. So it can be interchangeably. Okay, so it can mean the leader of the nation, or it can just mean the nation itself whenever it says beast. For example, if I was going to say, in the year 2022, Barack Obama rose up against the Queen of England. Okay, I know he won't be president at that point, but let's just say. In the year 2022, Barack Obama rose up against the Queen of England. Now, when I say that, you interpret that just to mean, okay, that would mean like America went to war against England, right? That's like what you wouldn't think that maybe Barack Obama got on Air Force One and flew over to England and socked the Queen of England in the mouth. You would just kind of know when I said when he rose up against her, I'm talking about the country as a whole would rise up against England as a whole.
I imagined it the latter.
You imagined it that he would just go punch the Queen of England. Well, when in the Bible, it might say Nebuchadnezzar rose up against Israel. Okay, that it doesn't mean Nebuchadnezzar's doing it by himself, but the whole nation is rising up together as a whole. That's kind of what it means. So a beast can represent the leader, or it can represent the nation as a whole. It just kind of goes back and forth. So he has this dream, and it says, out of the sea of humanity, four nations rose up out of the sea of humanity. I sent out I told you guys that Chapter 2 would have been a good one to review before coming today. Did anybody review chapter 2?
What?
Chapter 2, your notes on chapter 2? Well, this goes really well with chapter 2 because we talked about these kingdoms before, and now we're going to see them from a different perspective. And so let's look at verse 4. We'll look at the first one here. The first was like a lion. It had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to him. Okay, like you guys have, like Daniel 2, the beasts that are here in Daniel chapter 7, they are successive world kingdoms. You don't have to write these down. I'm just going to throw them up here. Like these are what the successive world empires were in world history. First it was Egypt, then Assyria. And basically what happened, like Assyria would defeat Egypt, then Babylon defeated Assyria, Persia defeated Babylon, Greece defeated Persia, Rome defeated Greece. And that was kind of how it always went. Like that was the pattern. And so whoever it was before, they would be defeated. So this first kingdom, the lion with the wings, that one represents Babylon. And the reason we're starting at Babylon is because when Daniel's writing this, Egypt and Persia, they're already history. Like they're not world empires anymore. They've been taken over. So we're starting here from Babylon, and that's the only ones. You don't have to write these down because we'll write them down in a minute anyway. But that's why, if you look in world history, it would say these are the world empires. But Daniel's starting right here in Babylon because that's where he is right now. And so the first one is this lion, and it had wings. Its wings were plucked off, and it said it was given the heart of a man, and it stood on 2 feet. Okay? The lion with wings represents Babylon. A lion was their main symbol in Babylon. If you guys remember last time we watched a video about how they were rebuilding Babylon, and I took this screenshot from it. Does anyone remember seeing this? This lion statue? That was just their symbol is lions, and they often had lions with wings as their symbol. By the way, guys, as I always say, you don't have to memorize dates. So I put that up there for info. You don't have to write that part down because it might be it's too much to remember. It's cool, it's interesting, but what I want you guys to remember is the lion with wings represents Babylon. And so Babylon's symbol was a lion with wings because a lion was the king of the animal world, and an eagle was considered like the king of the air. And so Babylon's just saying, we're the king of the world and the air, we're the king of everything. That was kind of Babylon's attitude, is that they were just the greatest of overall. And so also they had this symbol, like in a lot of places, it's just a lion with wings right there. It just symbolized to them, we're Babylon, we're king of the land, we're king of the air, we're all that stuff. And so that was on a lot of their ancient symbols and stuff like that, which people can still see today. The reason that the lion, it said it was given the heart of a man and stood up on 2 feet, that's a reference to what happened in the last story that we did. Do you guys remember in Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar was made to humble him, to get rid of his pride. He was made to live like an animal for 7 years. And after 7 years, it said that God gave him back the heart of a man. And he got back up on his 2 feet and probably shaved and took some showers and cut his fingernails. And, he went back to living normal life. And so that's what it's talking about here, that the lion stood up on 2 feet. Verse 5. Then suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. All right, the bear that said it was on its side, or had a very large side, that represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And as I always tell you guys, it's technically called the Medo-Persian Empire. If we just want to stick to calling it Persia, that's fine with me. That's what a lot of people will call it. Like Prince of Persia was that movie that came out a few years ago. A lot of people just refer to that area as Persia. Today it would be Iran is where it would be. Now, why is this a bear? Why is it up on its side? Well, Persia was it was a massive empire. Some people consider it bigger than all these others that we're talking about today. It was so big, but one side was bigger than the other. The reason it's called Medo-Persia is that there's a land, it's got a different name today, I think, but it's called Media back then, Media. And then there was Persia, and Persia's getting really powerful and taking over the world, doing what these other world empires have done before it. And so Persia comes along, they get over to Media, and they conquer Media. But I guess Media is just so big that instead of just turning Media into Persia, they let like Media they just say, let's just all join our forces together. Instead of being the Persian Empire, we'll be the Medo-Persian Empire. So that's where that kind of comes from. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in the next chapter because they come up again. But basically, the Persia side, that was really big. The Medo side, the Media side, that was a lot smaller. And so that's why this is a bear with one big side and one smaller side. It said it had 3 ribs in its mouth. I'm not really sure what the 3 ribs represent. They could mean, like, before them there were 3 other world empires. That could be what the 3 ribs represent, but they're not really sure what that means. But anyway, that's what the bear represents. So did everybody get that written down? The bear on its side represents the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay. Verse 6. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given over to it. Okay? This leopard with the 4 heads, that represents Greece. Maybe you kind of knew this was coming from looking at, what world empires were coming next. But that's what the leopard with the 4 heads represents. I didn't bold this part. It might be kind of important to know that. The 4 heads of the leopard, they represent 4 sections and their leaders of Greece. And as you're writing that down, I'll just say what the parts of this one represented. The Grecian Empire was incredibly fast with the way that it came and swept over the world and took it over. And so the leopard, it's one of the fastest animals in the world. I think the cheetah is actually a little bit faster. Does anyone know for sure? It's like the cheetah is the fastest. I think leopard's like second fastest. So it's extremely fast. And that's what this one represented. That when Greece came on the scene, they were so quick to take over the world. And they were led by a man named, anyone know? Not Caesar. Alexander the Great. He was their leader. And so he was a young man, and he was just a very brilliant military guy, like knew how to conquer places. And so he just did that incredibly fast, conquered the world for Greece, and right after he had Greece like taking over all this area and basically ruling the world, he died very young. I think he was 32 or 33, a very young man. And so after he died, he was the undisputed leader of Greece, but once he died, I don't know if he set it up this way or if this is just how it happened, but he left his empire to be divided into 4 parts. They were all Greece, but each of the 4 parts of Greece were ruled by a different person. And so their names were, I'm not sure how to say it, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Philip, and Antigonus. So he divided it up into the east, west, north, and south portions of his empire. And that's what the 4 heads of the leopard represent, is that Greece was, for most of the time that it existed, for like 300 years, it was an east, west, north, and south empire. So yeah, that's Greece. Then verses 7 and 8, it talks about the 4th beast. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. And so this was just a really, really weird, whenever you imagine this, like I say, this apocalyptic literature, it's describing strange images that all symbolize something. And so we hear about this beast, it's not even compared to an animal. It just says it's different from all the others. And it has iron legs and 10 horns on its head, and then a little horn that's talking. So it's like a really weird, and I've seen people draw pictures of this, and it's always like the weirdest, because it's a weird vision. I mean, it's a weird vision. So even seeing pictures of it are just creepy. But anyway, the 4th beast from the sea with the 10 horns, that one represents the Roman Empire. And we'll break those symbols down here too. So it says it was like devouring and breaking in pieces and trampling. That is how the Roman Empire conquered. When they came through places to conquer, they trampled it. And maybe you'd say, well, that's how anybody would conquer. Anybody would just trample over stuff. It's actually not true. The way Rome defeated was way more brutal than these other empires that had come before it. For example, when the Medo-Persians came in, they considered themselves very tolerant and like open-minded people. And so like when they would come through, yeah, they would like take over your land, but they would let you keep living life the way that you wanted to. They wouldn't like try to change your religion. They would just let you keep doing what you were doing. So they considered themselves like very loving in that aspect. And in fact, we might get into this next week, but like we get a lot of our morals today from the Medo-Persian Empire because of just some of the things that they did. They influenced like a lot of the world, even up to today. So they were not tramplers. They were actually kind of friendly about how they took over your land. Then Greece came along, and with Greece, Greece only targeted military centers. They would not target like innocent people or just civilians, Greece would only target other military. And so, they were maybe a little bit harsher, but they were only going after fighters. They weren't going after just like villages full of innocent people. And that's not how Rome was. When Rome came through, they would slaughter people just because they were just mean, okay? So that's what made kind of Rome. That's why it has these iron legs, and it says that they trampled everything before them because they were just mean like that. So that was Rome. Now we know from chapter 2 that the Roman Empire, it's going to be ultimately overtaken by the kingdom of God, and that the stone hit the feet of the statue and shattered the statue. That's how it happened in chapter 2. But we also know from chapter 2 that the Roman Empire slowly whittled away, but then it became revived right at the end for the Antichrist empire. And so it's all still Rome. It's all still going together. But these 10 horns that were on the head, that represents the 10 rulers of the Roman Empire. In the statue dream, it was the 10 toes on the feet, and that represented the 10 leaders of the Roman Empire. In this one, it's this beast with 10 horns, and so that's what the 10 horns represent. That's where they come in. And so one thing to make a note of, because this also comes up a lot in apocalyptic literature, a horn refers to a nation's leader, or like some kind of ruler. And so Rome, at the time that it's revived and the Antichrist is ready to come take it back, it's going to have 10 leaders that are kind of like ruling over the world. That's what the Bible says. Have you guys got that written down? I'm going to give you guys a handout here. It just, like I said, chapter 2 and chapter 7 here, they go together really well. And so they show how all these things line up. I don't know. I just got that off the internet. I only got it because it lines up these 4 things. So in the statue, we had the head of gold. In Daniel's dream, it's the lion with wings. Both of those represent Babylon. And you can just kind of go on down the list there and see how those things line up. I know the front of this chapter, guys, it's a little bit kind of like front heavy with a lot of information. And from here out, we've only got through 8 verses, but we can kind of sail through the rest of these verses a little bit quicker. So before the Antichrist becomes ruler of the world, it says Rome's going to be revived. And this could happen very quickly, actually. Rome will be revived, and it'll have 10 leaders who are all kind of managing, I guess, trying to rule the world or a large portion of the world altogether. And just a couple weeks ago, the president of France wrote like this editorial commentary thing saying that all these countries in Europe that are all using the euro, what they need to do is just merge all their countries together. This was the president of France saying that. And so a lot of people think that that's how the revived Roman Empire will kind of come into existence, is that these like European countries are just going to merge together and put all their money in together and all that. And so here's the headline: the Greece debt crisis. They call for a Eurozone government to further integrate member states. So it just basically means they would all kind of throw in together and just become a super United States of Europe. Like we're the United States of America, it would be like they become the United States of Europe. They might ask America to join in with them. I don't know. Copycats, yeah. There's also a group called the Club of Rome. There's Rome again. That wants to globalize the world, and they're out there in Europe. They're saying what we need to do is globalize the whole world and just all follow the same currency and all this stuff. And they call themselves the Club of Rome, which I think is really interesting because the Bible says Rome is going to be revived in the end. And here's what the Club of Rome has done. The Club of Rome went in and divided the whole world up into 10 sections. And they said, we need to just divide the world up into 10 parts. And this is like, we'd have some people managing this section and some people managing this section and some people managing this section, and they've got this planned out. And so when I say like the revived Roman Empire could come on the scene very quick, it's like the pieces are already in place. The Club of Rome, which, they give themselves away with even calling themselves that, they've got the pieces in place right there. They've got a plan to make the whole world this global empire thing. And so that's like from their plan right there. So we'll talk at the end of the chapter. Daniel's going to ask God some questions about what this Roman Empire is going to do. Back to your Bibles. Let's look at verses 9 and 10, still in Daniel chapter 7. It says, so it's just been talking about the fourth beast. If we were comparing this to the Daniel dream from chapter 2, right after that last kingdom is talked about, a stone comes and smacks it in the feet and knocks the statue over. Here's what happens in the Daniel 7 dream. He says, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, and 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. And so it said, when anytime the Bible says the books were opened, something serious is about to go down, right? So right after this Roman Empire arrives on the scene in the dream, then God shows up. I think we kind of know this guy on the throne, the Ancient of Days. This is God himself, and so he shows up. And it says in verse 11, I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. So it's saying that this little horn was tossed into a burning flame. And here's a spoiler alert, the little horn is the Antichrist himself, which we'll get into in a few minutes. That's who the little horn is, and it says he's thrown right into the fire. And we could turn to Revelation if we wanted to and read this exact scene, but we don't really need to because it's happening right here too. He's thrown into the fire. In Revelation, the Antichrist is the first person thrown into the lake of fire. And then right after him, his false prophet is thrown in, and all the people who joined up with him, who received the mark of the beast, they're all thrown in there. And so that's what happens in Revelation. And after that, the whole lake of fire thing, anybody who didn't join in with the Antichrist, they get to stick around for a little bit longer in Jesus' 1,000-year kingdom on the earth. And so in verse 12 here in Daniel, it says, as for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So these other kingdoms of the world who are still around after the tribulation, if they didn't join in with the Antichrist and take his mark, they get to hang out on the earth for a little bit longer, for the 1,000-year period, when Jesus is in control. But after the 1,000 years, they'll have to have made a decision by that point. Jesus will separate the sheep and the goats. Okay, verse 13. Daniel says, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days as they brought him near before him. Who is the Son of Man? This is a very, very, very common title for someone in the Bible. Who? Yes, Jesus. Jesus is the Son of Man. So Jesus shows up here in this vision too. Do you guys remember, Daniel calls him the Son of Man here. Do you guys remember in the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego story in the fiery furnace, Daniel's not in any of that story. Did you guys notice that? He's not even, it doesn't say where he was. He might have been just somewhere else and he wasn't around during all that. But Daniel wasn't in any of that story. If he had been there, he probably would have been thrown in the fiery furnace too, but if he had been there, he would have seen the Son of Man and he would have said, hey, that's the same guy who was in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He probably would have recognized him, but he wasn't even there during that whole thing. And so anyway, he sees him and he calls him the Son of Man. And we know that that's Jesus Christ himself. In fact, Jesus, when speaking to the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 26, I'm throwing this up here. You don't have to write it down because it's a bunch of words. But here's what Jesus said. It's when he's on trial and they're wanting to put him on the cross. But Jesus kept silent, and the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, it is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, he has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. Now, when you look at that, They said, tell us if you're the Christ. Tell us if you're the Son of God. Did Jesus say he's the Son of God? He didn't say that, did he? He said, behold, you'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. He didn't even say I'm the Son of God. He says, you're going to see the Son of Man coming on the clouds saying, that's who I am. And that made the Pharisees very angry. Anytime the Pharisees get angry, always look at why they're angry. Sometimes we wouldn't think it was something that sounded that bad, but if they got angry about it, look at why. The reason they got mad here is because they know he's talking about Daniel chapter 7. And they know Jesus is saying, I'm the Son of Man who showed up in Daniel 7. And so he's pointing them back to these verses right here where it says, behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. So they knew what Jesus was saying, and that's why they got so angry about it. They're saying, he's saying that that's him himself right here. So you guys kind of know this already, but the Ancient of Days on the throne, that's God, and the Son of Man coming in the clouds is Jesus. And so that's the thing I really want you to take away from this section in the middle of the chapter here. That's who, the Ancient of Days is God, Son of Man is Jesus. So it says in verse 14, wrapping this section up, then to him was given, talking about the Son of Man, to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed. And so this is talking about, Jesus is going to come set up his own kingdom, and all these others will be subject to him. Antichrist will be gotten rid of. So it's following along the same pattern that this would be like the stone striking that statue and demolishing it. It's talking more in detail here about Jesus will come and set up his own kingdom. And so that's, it'll say in the end of the chapter, Daniel doesn't even understand what this stuff means. He'll say that at the end. But we, knowing what we know now, we have more information than Daniel, so we can understand these things. Daniel chapter 7, verse 15. And so it says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Any questions about any of that? This is where I was explaining what the beasts meant as we went through. I did that because we get to this point and he says, these are all going to be four leaders who arise out of the world. Well, then we'd have to just go back and go through the visions again. So I covered it the first time. So he's just telling Daniel what all these things meant. In verses 19 and 20, Daniel says, then I wished to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet, and the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely, that horn which had eyes and a mouth which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. So he says, I want to know about this little horn who rose up. I want to know more details about him. This horn who knocked down 3 of the other horns that were there. And so from the last half of Daniel 7, there's lots of things that we hear about the Antichrist. But there's 3 I want you guys to remember from the lesson. If we can boil it down to 3. And here's a couple of them. One of them, so the Antichrist will appear amidst 10 world leaders, and he will kill or overpower or overthrow 3 of them. So there'll be 10 world leaders. The Antichrist will rise up, and he will subdue 3. I don't know if that means he'll kill them or just take them out of power. And then the second thing I put up there, the Antichrist has lots and lots of different titles, and we always just call him the Antichrist. That's one of the titles from the New Testament. There's 40 different titles that are given to him throughout the Bible. Like here, he's called the little horn, and there's other titles that come up too. But anyway, the defining characteristic, probably the one aspect of the Antichrist's personality that comes out more than anything else is that he's going to be a very proud man and a very boastful man. And so he'll constantly be talking about himself, lifting himself up, tearing other people down, saying things against God to say, I'm greater than God, stuff like that. And so in the way it's translated here, it says he had pompous words. But really, the defining characteristic of the Antichrist, it's his boastful and blasphemous mouth. Boastful means proud, and blasphemous, that means saying things against God. negative things against God. Anytime someone does that, that's called blasphemy. So he talks about this little horn, and in verses 21 and 22, I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So Jesus said that he's going to build his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. That's what Jesus said. But then right here, the same word, it says the Antichrist was prevailing against the saints. And so what's going on here? Jesus said that the gates of hell wouldn't prevail against the church, but then right here, a servant of hell, the Antichrist, he's prevailing against the saints. And so what's going on here? Is that a contradiction? What's going on? Well, Jesus said that about the church. The church, hell is not going to prevail against the church. We are a special people, being the church of God. We are a special people talked about in the Bible that hell cannot defeat us. However, in the tribulation, when the Antichrist is in power, during that period of time, the church isn't going to be here. The church leaves in the rapture. There's no more church. So there's not going to be this stuff going on like what we have today. There aren't going to be people meeting in a room like this, in a building like this. The people who become Christians during that time will just really be on their own. They aren't going to have this community thing like we have. And so they won't have the structure. And so the Antichrist, he is going to prevail against them because they're not the church. They're what I like to call tribulation saints. They're saints who get saved during those last 7 years. And that's who will really be targeted quite easily by the Antichrist, because if there's no structure and there's no organization, they don't have a church, then it'll be really easy for him to target those kind of people and kind of single them out and attack them. So verses 23 and 24, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms, which shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And so I've already interpreted this stuff for you as we were going through it, but that's the angel interpreting it there too. And, it'd be really easy for someone to say, well, how could Rome come back and be like the leader of the world again? Because Rome's gone, so Rome is dead. How can Rome be revived if Rome is dead? I'll tell you guys something. I don't think that Rome ever left. I don't think that Rome's ever gone away. And I say that because, let me give you an example. Who is legally the most powerful person in our country? Politically or whatever. Officially. Who's the most powerful person? Yes, Ben? Hillary Clinton. Well, right now, we would say it'd be the President of the United States, right? Our president is Barack Obama right now. So we would say officially, he's the most powerful person in our country. But even though he's officially the most powerful person, let's just say, this might even be true, I don't know. But let's just say, just as an example, that everything that Barack Obama does, he goes to his wife first and gets the go-ahead from her. And he's like, I want, hun, should I do this? Should I sign this law? And if she says, no, don't sign that law, that's a stupid law, then he won't sign it. And if she says, oh, that's great, go ahead and sign it, then he would. Now, that's just an example. If he always goes to her for all his decisions, then is he, even though he's officially the most powerful man in the world, is he actually the most powerful person in our country? Or would his wife be actually the most powerful? Well, he'd be the most powerful man, yeah. But would he actually be running the country, or would it really be his wife? Now, I don't really think that's how it works in their family. I'm just giving an example. His wife would kind of be in control then, even though he's officially the one who's in control. And so I don't think that I think Rome has always had the influence over the world. I was watching this movie one time. It was about the King of England, like 60 or 70 years ago. King George, like the fifth or whoever was the king during World War II. And this king, he was actually not the person who was supposed to be the king. He had an older brother. And so the way it would work is the older brother would be the one who was supposed to be king. But since the older brother didn't want to be king, that's why King George was the one who was going to be the next one. Actually, his brother did want to be king. He couldn't, though, because he was going to marry a woman who was divorced. And the church, like the Catholic Church, they said, well, we're not going to make you king if you're going to marry a divorced woman. And that was the Roman Catholic Church. And so we could say, well, the King of England, he's the most powerful person in England. But the King of England can't even be the King of England unless the Roman Catholic Church says so. So who's really kind of controlling England then? Is it the king or is it the church? Yeah, the Roman Catholic Church. And so I think that Rome has never disappeared. I think they've always had an influence in the world, even through the Catholic Church, which is located in Rome, Italy, the Vatican, which is why we call it the Roman Catholic Church. They've always just been the ones, I think, pulling the strings. I don't think they've ever really left power over the world. But someday they'll rise up again. And like I said, it could happen very quickly. I mean, it could happen just in an incredibly short period of time. And so anyway, Rome was the people who stepped in. They removed Greece from power. And so they truly influenced the world, I think, more than anything else today. And their final leader is going to be this Antichrist. In verse 25, it says, "He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time." And so 2 things I want to talk about there. When it says he's going to change the times and the law, I think that means, my guess is that he's going to put in a different calendar system or something like that. Rich time? Are you the Antichrist? Batman's the Antichrist. I knew it. But I think he'll change the dating system that we go by, because right now it's all centered around who? Our calendars? Jesus, right? I think that's what you said. It's all centered around Jesus because it's the year 2015 right now, because 2015 years ago is when we believe Jesus was probably born. And so it's all based off of that. I don't think the Antichrist is going to like that, so I think he's probably going to change like the calendar system or something like that, and probably center it around himself. I don't know. And he'll probably outlaw like any holidays, because almost any holiday has a religious background to it. If it's like a Jewish feast or if it's, Christmas or whatever, there's always like a religious symbolism to it. So when it says he'll change times and law, a lot of people think that means he'll change like holidays and get rid of them. And then it says the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Does anybody remember how long a time is in Daniel? What? A year. I mean, we covered that already in Daniel. But yes, a time is a year. And so when it says a time, times, and half a time, let me click here. A time would be 1 year. Times, that word times, it actually means 2. It's a plural word, but it's a word that means 2 of something, if you go back to the original language. So I know some people might say times, well, we don't know if that's 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. The word actually just means 2 times. And so a time, times, and then a half a time. If a time is a year, then a half of a time would be 6 months, because it'd be half of a year. And so when you add that up, a time, that's 1. A times is 2, so that's 2 years. And then half a time is 6 months. So that's 1 plus 2 plus 6 months. So how many years is that total?
3.5 years.
Yes, sir. 3.5 years. That's 3.5 years. And that's referring to the second half of the Great Tribulation. I think we've just got like 3 or 4 verses left, guys. So we're almost done. Because the first, the tribulation is 7 years long. The first 3.5 years, the Antichrist is this guy who rides in on a white horse, and people think he's just awesome and cool. And it's not until the last half that he kind of shows his true colors and is really aggressively persecuting people. So that's why when it says that it's just 3.5 years, that's the time that he'll be hunting down like Christians. Verses 26 and 27. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume it and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. And so the last note that I want you guys just to remember on the Antichrist, I said I'd give you 3 today. His final destination is the lake of fire. He'll actually be, he's, like I said, the first person thrown in there. It's a word for hell. And he'll just be thrown in there because he's first, because he's the worst, I guess. And after that, the kingdom of God, it says, will be established forever. Yeah. Do you have a question, Ben?
So whenever God comes back and defeats him, at the very end, like
the very right before the end comes up and then roll the credits. We
Just
need to make
changed
a movie.
my whole perspective on the Bible.
The credits are
Turned
gonna
the Bible into a movie for me.
The
That
cr-
is awesome.
the credits are gonna last 1,000 years though. So.
Well, Marvel movies have to
Exactly. On Marvel movies, there's always a scene after the credits. So that's after
Bible's basically a movie.
that'll be the new heavens and new earth, I guess.
Or the next Marvel movie.
You know, that was excellent.
Yes, that's the end of the Bible. At the end, Nick Fury comes out and asks Jesus to join the Avengers. Is that what it?
I mean, that'd be awesome. Someone
Stanley. Maybe Stanley's this Ancient of Days on the.
Where is Chuck Norris in this mixture of us?
He roundhouse kicks the horn into the lake of fire.
Yes.
Okay, one or two verses left. Verse 28, it says, "This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart." So Daniel, it says, he was greatly troubled by all this stuff that he had seen. He was really worried about it, and probably because the reason he was so scared, it's because of this fourth kingdom that was going to come. And here's what's kind of interesting about it, is that this kingdom wasn't even going to come around whenever Daniel was alive. He knew it would be long after he was alive, but yet it still terrified him so much to think about what this fourth kingdom would be. And it's this Antichrist kingdom that's still yet to come. He was greatly concerned about it, and so he's probably kind of pale by the end of this vision and just very worried about it. Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, they both had dreams, and they both saw similar things. They both saw the future of several world empires that all describe the times of the Gentiles. But they had very different perspectives on them. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about the future kingdoms, and he sees it as this magnificent statue. And Nebuchadnezzar is very excited about it. Daniel has a dream about the future empires, and he sees them as these beasts. A beast is not like a very positive thing to call somebody or describe something. So Daniel sees them as beasts. Nebuchadnezzar, as an unbeliever, sees them as like a beautiful statue. And so it's just like a different perspective they both have. As an unbeliever, Nebuchadnezzar's perspective is that a rock's just going to come in and destroy this statue. And as a believer, Daniel saw the kingdom of God as God seated on the throne and the Son of Man coming on the clouds. And that's how Daniel saw the kingdom coming in. Nebuchadnezzar got excited about it. Nebuchadnezzar, when he heard about the statue, he says, "I'm excited." He's like, "My kingdom's going to endure for the rest of my life." And Daniel, when he looks at it, he says, "I'm greatly troubled about all these things that are going to happen after my life is over." He's troubled about it even though he's not going to be there. And so we need to be like Daniel and have just a loving concern for the people who are out there who might have to go through this kingdom, who might have to be alive at the time when he comes into power, because the world is not going to be a positive place when that's going on. And Daniel's just worried because he knows, he's just, even about people he doesn't know, the people who might be alive today, Daniel's worried about them, that they're going to have to go through that. But for us, it is a positive note for us because the Antichrist will be overthrown. He and his minions, they're all going to be thrown in the lake of fire. And God's kingdom is going to be established on planet Earth forever and ever. And that could only be 7 years away, if you think about it. Rapture happens tomorrow. All that could be 7 years away. So it might not be far. But we just keep waiting and looking.